Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the moon. I am your host for this evening, Lawrence Ray, and today I'm joined by my esteemed co-hosts, Ricardo Martinez and Jerry. And today we are interviewing the Bitcoiner, Wasabi researcher and contributor, Nothingmuch. So today, how are you doing, sir?
Hi, I'm good, thanks. Yeah, I was too lazy to put in my real name on the Zoom, but for what it's worth, my actual name given name is Yuval, so that's also fair game.
Yeah. Okay, well, so thanks for clarifying. I wasn't sure if you wanted to, use it or not. Basically, you never know. So okay, also yeah. I can call you Yuval. That's brilliant. Well, in that case, we'll get straight into it. Essentially, with the pod, as everyone knows. So yeah, what I like to do is, as you may have realized from other podcasts, is at the beginning of the podcast to go into the beginning of you as a person, so that we can kind of understand what makes you tick and where you came from, etc., etc. Obviously, one of the things that you're working on is with Wasabi Wallet and Bitcoin privacy. And so I guess the question I wanted to ask you first off is how, in the very beginning, did you get into programming in the first place? Like, what's the story behind that, I suppose? Like, how did you work out that was something you were interested? How did it come to you? How did you learn? That kind of thing.
On some level, I think it traces back to being obsessed with Legos as a kid. And later being exposed to video games, and I barely remember anything at all about the games, but one thing I remember super vividly is this game editor that my friend brought once, and just tweaking the values that are there behind the scene, and realizing there's a latent model there that is concrete. It's not magic. So I kind of tried to force my dad to learn to program, and that didn't work too smoothly. This was the mid 90s, and we tried. It didn't really work. But then a few years later, I started I got online and started using view source and cargo culting JavaScript, and I guess the big transformative moment was so we were living in Israel at the time, and my parents had Macs for reasons that they traveled and stuff, and didn't realize it was a really obscure thing in Israel. And so I was in this island, isolated. All my friends had PCs, and I didn't have very much to do. So my one source of stuff was Mac Addict magazine had CDs with stuff on it, just shareware and freeware and stuff like that. And one of the CDs had Mac Perl on it, and I think I basically learned how to program from the Perl documentation. And then when I actually got internet access, this really accelerated. The Perl community was super supportive. I got into open source, and it was never really a decision. It kind of just happened on its own that I can't really trace it to some specific event. But yeah, I wrote a lot of crap Perl code, and then years later, I kind of got tired of programming. I felt like it was a bit meaningless, and then Bitcoin kind of screwed me up and convinced me that actually I am optimistic about this stuff after all. And
that's interesting. Because I'm trying to think. Because I remember I had a Windows 98 PC. I think would be my first ever computer I had access to. So I guess I would have found someone at that age. I would have found someone having a Mac kind of strange and out there for me, I guess. So kind of can understand. But I suppose you learned from these. Is it something that that you learned? Was there any mention of programming at all in school, or was it something that was just entirely not because I know for myself, it was like we learned how to Google and like how to set a password, and that was kind of like that was or like database. I think we did like Excel and stuff like that, and that was basically kind of it. I don't know. Was it different for yourself, or was it literally just like purely self interest, self taught, self driven?
So by the time I already realized I was super interested in this, like all we had was like typing lessons. This was like 94, 95 or something like that. So like they were teaching us to touch type on like old DOS machines, just doing like, spelling drills or something like that. Not much at all about like how to actually use computers. But by this point, I was already like learning from friends. At the time, we were living in the States, and there I did have some access to like friends with like older brothers and stuff who had some cool things to say. I think it was only by like 7th grade or something that I actually started like learning how to program, and maybe 8th grade actually. And only after I'd already started did we get like I think Google came out like 98 or something, and that became a thing. And they started teaching us like computer literacy stuff, which included like Excel and stuff. But yeah, it was primarily, I guess, self-driven in that regard.
So obviously, as you said, you lost interest in programming, and I guess because I guess it's that classic thing for like the human mind where it's like you want something that you really have to build, or will make like a big difference if you help build it or whatever, and obviously that's lacking. And so I guess you go through school and part-time jobs, whatever, the ordinary stuff. So like when did you come across Bitcoin? And I suppose the question there is like, what did you think about it when you first read about it and encountered it, and kind of what stuck for you specifically? Because it's always different for people, like whether it's the design or the philosophy behind it or the economics. So what was it for you that kind of stuck?
Well, my dad's a mathematician, and he attended a lecture. I think it must have been like 2002 or something like that, by famous cryptographer Adi Shamir. I think it was something like how to spend a penny online or something like that. And then he came back home and just told me about like a bunch of cool stuff, like blind signatures and linkable ring signatures and the double spend problem. And so I was, already, I think I was 17, kind of, vaguely aware of like the problems in the space, and already like super interested in what decentralized money could do, and then a few years later I was running my own mail server, and I learned about Hashcash from like Spam Assassin. And I didn't have a like reverse DNS, like a proper reverse DNS entry. So to like reduce my mail server's spam scores on the assumption that the other side is also running Spam Assassin, like Hashcash was actually a fairly effective thing. So by the time Bitcoin came around, of course, I was an expert. I knew everything, and I knew that obviously it wouldn't work because this very long list of reasons why it's not fit for purpose, and so I completely dismissed it offhand as stupid. And then I think that was when it got on Slashdot. And then a while later, I had a friend ask about this stuff. I think this must have been like 2012 or something, because he was asking about the Silk Road and whether or not like he wanted to buy wheat basically, and so I looked into it a little bit more seriously, and I started trying to like figure out, okay, well, how do you compile this crap, and or maybe that was earlier. So that was a source of friction. And then I told him, like, look, we're gonna have to buy it. It's too late to mine it. Because people were already like starting to use GPUs and stuff, and this means like wiring money to some shady thing in Japan, and like the forum is full of scammers, and also like what you hear about it being anonymous, that's like total bullshit. So like I just told him, like, look, this is a bad idea. Don't do it. And then in 2013, I have this like Facebook status where the Pirate Party posted a guy, like he got a letter from the bank saying that they're going to close his account because he's dealing with Mt. Gox, and completely arbitrarily. And I think that was like a light bulb moment. And like I don't remember doing this, but like my status from that time says like, finally a good reason to be interested in Bitcoin or something like that. And so I guess I kind of started realizing this thing is more interesting than I initially thought. And unfortunately, I didn't do anything about that. I didn't have a computer at the time. I was by this point kind of out of the loop from like software things. And then like late 2015 or something, I dropped out of school for various reasons, and reluctantly took a software job again. And at this point, this was with the benefit of the Snowden revelations in hindsight, which kind of confirmed a whole bunch of stuff that I suspected was true, and I guess really reaffirmed my distrust of government. And then a coworker was like had a bit of Bitcoin he wanted to get rid of because he thought it was a bad investment. And I was like, okay, maybe if I just buy it off him, I'll finally have force myself to properly learn about it. And yeah, I think I haven't slept properly since. Yeah, it was I guess about a year of distracting myself with various other cryptocurrencies to try and figure out, because the privacy story and the whole smart contract bullshit, like getting to the bottom of those things and realizing, okay, actually like Bitcoin is certainly not superseded, and even if it had been improved upon in technical like various technical attributes, that like the network effect, the fairness of the launch, the like a priori definition of like the monetary rules, even though I have some issues with them, like all of that seemed to on the whole be a much stronger argument for focusing on that and being interested in that. And yeah, it just kind of gave me, like, I was really underwhelmed with the level of accountability in software. Like by 2010 or so, I just felt like basically like a bureaucrat's enforcer. Like I build unaccountable bureaucratic systems that just do things. They affect the the social, the physical world. They control the flow of resources and time and power distribution in society to some extent, and I'm getting compensated, and I don't see like there's a disconnect between what I'm getting paid and the value that I think I'm contributing to society. And I was really disenchanted by the whole software industry, and Bitcoin kind of convinced me that actually, like, open source is not just some sort of reputational whitewashing scam for the industry to like pat itself on the back and tell itself it's a pro-social thing. Like this is something that actually can have a meaningful like political impact on the way power works in society, precisely because money is kind of like a proxy for how we manage resources. I like to think of it as sort of a protocol for just communicating under information asymmetry about like what we should all collectively be doing. If like markets are a protocol, then like money itself is like the packets of information flowing through that protocol. Or another perspective is a kind of like distributed memory. And if these things are not trustworthy, if they're so subject to like discretionary like changes in policy, and these things have these obviously negative effects on society and how we manage our problems at scale, then we need a kind of reset. And Bitcoin seemed like it was actually principled and convincing enough to like establish that basic trustworthiness, despite its technical limitations. And at the time, I became much more aware that the technical limitations that I initially thought were unworkable actually turned out to be far less of a problem than I had previously imagined. So yeah, I guess that's kind of my journey to caring, and privacy seems like the most, or at least for me personally, it's the most urgent problem to work on.
I wanted to ask, what are your thoughts about the recent Chainalysis leak, where they claimed that they're able to demix Monero and that they were running their own nodes to surveil the Bitcoin network, and they even had like a block explorer built for surveillance?
So the Wallet Explorer issue, I was actually, just to be clear, I'm not 100% caught up with that story, but like Wallet Explorer was written by a guy who later went on and got hired, and I think that was fairly well known. It was also well known that maybe not Chainalysis specifically, but various companies run Electrum nodes and Bitcoin nodes to try and localize transaction propagation and do various other things. More generally, it's like Bitcoin Core specifically, and the Bitcoin ecosystem in general has privacy leaks at the network layer. So I guess it was a kind of knowledge blindness where, like, to me, it seemed like obvious that this was going on. And I mean, it's nice to have concrete proof that this is, that they actually admitted to doing that. I think it also helps to highlight the fact that, like, even if you have on the base layer strong cryptographic assurances like Monero has, that's not enough if you account for like a more holistic model for privacy that also account for metadata leaks through the network layer, or temporal patterns and so on and so forth. So in this regard, like, it wasn't really a surprise, but I'm glad that it happened, because I think it helps to elevate the discourse. And so yeah, not much. I think that the drama was a little bit overblown, but yeah, I mean, it's an adversarial situation. It's a huge business model for these companies to basically sell the service of pseudoscientific narratives that are then used to justify like violent enforcement in some situations. And it's just, I don't think it's morally justifiable, even if it were effective at preventing crime, which it really doesn't appear to be. So yeah, I guess that's my take on it.
You mentioned in like your earlier answer that there was like some concerns you had originally with Bitcoin, and some things that you thought would be an issue, and then and I guess you also you intimated, and I don't know if it's the case or not, but that there's still some sort of, I don't know, gripes maybe that you have with like the way that Bitcoin's designed, or some concerns at least, I guess anyway, with Bitcoin. Do you recall what the sort of issues were that you had, or do you have like a view now on like kind of some disadvantages to Bitcoin or its design, or things you feel like you maybe would have done differently, I suppose?
I guess that's a long list of nitpicks. Things like why are the timestamps in the header 32 bits? I mean, for fuck's sake. Or like all the weird endianness stuff. But okay, those are like technical nits that are possible to work around. There's slightly more fundamental issues, like the fact that the Merkle trees don't commit to the depth or the type of the node. So this led to this, I think, Sergio Lerner's like SPV attack. So there's all sorts of gripes like that, which are okay. I mean, we can work with them, right? These are flaws, but they're not deal breakers. My main issues at the time were like the monetary policy. I actually would prefer like asymptotically 0% inflation instead of like a fixed supply. It seems like a more sustainable thing to me. It removes some of the like the weird complex dynamics in like how fees are done, but I mean it's too late for that. And again, we can work with what we've got. Same thing for the halvenings. I thought that was like a really crude and weird mechanism, but I mean it's priced in, and by now like it appears I was wrong about that. It seems to have like significant meme value by the the volume of discussions that people are having on Twitter and whatnot. So like none of those things really matter. Like, okay, I would have done it differently, and I have a long list of things, and of course I would have screwed up a whole bunch of other things, but none of that really matters because the system already exists. The important attributes are the fairness of the launch, the novelty of the system, and the fact that it's the first of its kind and gathering a sort of network effect. Those things are not replaceable. And like bickering about the minutia that I thought was much more consequential previously, it's just not that big a deal in hindsight. So I mean, I could go into more depth about what I think is ugly about the system, but yeah, it's I mean, it is what it is, and I think it's more interesting to think, okay, given these constraints, what and then referring to like Adam Gibson's interview on this podcast, where he was saying like the DNA of a blockchain is like this property of verifiability, and how it's very important to have transparency with regards to that verifiability. And this also means that like building on complicated cryptographic primitives in some sense reduces that verifiability. Like, given that Bitcoin is kind of flawed or at least janky, but not fundamentally flawed, and makes a very, very clear trade-off, it seems like it's impossible to like address any of these minor concerns without compromising these properties, or like trying to establish consensus about all these like ultimately not very consequential details. it just doesn't seem important enough, I guess. Whereas, issues like making sure that fungibility does manifest in some capacity, that seems like a very high priority. And I don't see that Bitcoin has like serious flaws in this regard. It's we have to work under very limiting constraints, but it's a trade-off that I think is acceptable. And this is why personally, like, even though I find Zcash, Monero, etc., very interesting on a technical level, I think the innovations are great and interesting. It's not what I would want to work on, because the social impact doesn't seem as important.
I was thinking, obviously, you're working in a lot of privacy-based Bitcoin work, and you mentioned as well, like, kind of the imperfections, but kind of the fact that actually things like the halving have actually kind of been a good thing almost for Bitcoin, a bit of a kind of memeability kind of thing, and that sometimes imperfections can almost help. And you obviously just mentioned there at the end about Zcash and Monero. Something I wanted to ask you was like, why? Because obviously, if you're working the privacy side of things with Bitcoin, what pushed you towards Bitcoin and that rather than Monero? But it sounds to me, is it the case that it's more that there's more impact with Bitcoin, it's more established, it's more important to you and to others? Is that more the reason, or is it more that, for example, we've spoken to people on the podcast before, I think it was Jack Manzuko and I think maybe even Adam Gibson, who kind of felt that having everything baked in, a lot baked in, privacy baked in at that base layer, kind of caused more issues than actually having a simpler base, sort of clearer, more transparent base layer that you could then build upon with layers. Is that a part too, or is it more literally just the kind of social impact aspect of Bitcoin that made you think, hey, this is what I want to work on? I guess what I'm trying to ask is, like, what was it that made you go, hey, this is the one, like Bitcoin is what I want to work on, not Monero, Zcash, etc.? What were the kind of the key factors?
I guess it's much more the social aspects. When I was first getting interested in this stuff, I did not have the requisite background I think now I have the requisite background to understand like Monero's cryptography, certainly not Zcash. So that's another barrier. Like, Bitcoin was a thing where I actually was able to understand the problems and see them clearly and start thinking of solutions. So one aspect is, like, I felt like I could actually make a contribution there. But it's much more so that, like, if the way I see it, if Bitcoin were to fail completely, catastrophically, it's going to bring down the whole ecosystem with it. That there's no saving, cryptocurrencies as a way towards decentralized money. I think if that project fails. So I think the social aspects are, like, specifically the reason I'm interested in Bitcoin is I've always, like, as far back as I can remember, like, even as a 4-year-old, like, getting dragged to the running errands with my parents, and they go to the bank and it's like the most boring and oppressive environment and none of it makes sense. And I have, practical questions like, who puts the money in the ATM and why? Like, what makes it so that you can get the money out of there? Like, where does it come from? And, like, the answers just never made sense. And then, like, as I grew older, I learned about foreign exchange markets, and I learned about inflation, and I learned about a whole bunch of other stuff. And it's like, economics or macroeconomics it kind of works like in reverse to, like, the way science typically does, where the theories become mainstream and then they're applied as part of government policy. It's not really, for the most part, like an explanatory model, a descriptive model of how the world works. It's a prescriptive, like, doctrine that just doesn't it doesn't really mesh for me. I always kind of felt like my parents were not very well off financially growing up, but by the time I became an adult, they were firmly in the middle class and got their debt in order and so on. So like we were we went from living quite modestly, certainly not poor or anything like that, but like I had material desires that went unfulfilled as a kid, and kind of learned to I don't really get gratification from having a disposable income as an adult. So like for a few years I was compensating for all the crap I wanted as a kid and couldn't get, and now that I'm a man child, I can afford to buy that stuff. And but what good does it really do? So that passed rather quickly, and then I felt like, well, do I invest? Do I start saving? Like, and it always seemed like a double bind. Like, regardless of what I looked into, everything seemed like it was stacked against me, where I could take a low risk tolerance approach to trying and establishing a future, but then I set aside more money towards my pension funds or something, but then I have to trust corrupt insurance companies and like in Israel specifically, this is a whole like this network of billionaires owning the banks and major corporations and insurance companies, and like they've been caught embezzling funds, and their fines and debts are forgiven routinely. They evade tax, and that doesn't seem to matter. So like, I don't want to trust these people with my future. I don't even trust the government with the future. So this low risk strategy seems not very viable. But then also, like any sort of high risk strategy, like do I start like investing in the stock market? Like, no, I'm just gonna get wrecked because the median investor just loses money. And I don't have the resources or the time to like have a strategy that's actually gonna result in anything better than average returns. So like everything felt like a scam in the financial world, and this was really reinforced for me with the 2008 financial crisis, and the fact that like nobody got indicted except for Iceland, if I remember correctly. Like they I think tried to prosecute a few bankers, but like, so when you have a feeling that there's like a game that the only like the expected value of participating in this game is negative, you kind of develop this like nihilistic point of view, I guess. So I just spent all my money on travel, and basically all my money was spent trying to accumulate experiences, which is what I actually valued. So like if it was material possessions in the service of actually doing something interesting, using up my time on Earth to have fun, to build memories, that seemed justified. But it still felt like a cop-out, basically. Like this was not a responsible way to manage my finances, and even though I still in hindsight think it was rational, like the absence of a way to hedge against the mismanagement of like the entire economic political system was just felt there needs to be some sort of option to, and I mean, you can plant trees, you can get into real estate or something. I guess that was the closest thing I could have considered before, like saving money for a mortgage or something. But even that seemed kind of, scammy. So to me, that is the main function that Bitcoin provides. It's not, a speculative instrument. It's not for buying coffee. It's not for, like, the purpose of this thing is to allow people to earn fiat money in the normal way the economy works, and to use that to buy Bitcoin as sort of signal to the rest of the economic system that we need to do better, basically. And in doing so, these people are forfeiting short-term interests on the off chance that, like, this will work and they will have more economic influence later down the line. So basically, it's not just a savings instrument to me, but it's also a way of like the only way that in my life so far I've found that I can feel like I'm applying market discipline, and it's not just me like screwing myself over. Like before, the choice was like I could maximize my purchasing power by buying as quickly as possible with my slowly inflating money, and contribute to the destruction of the world through consumer culture and all the stuff that I end up actually paying for indirectly, like advertisements and oil wars and environmental destruction and so on. Or I could do the proper thing, which from a self-interested point of view is completely irrational, which is like just try and save that money, see it lose its value. And it's like I have some really absurd examples. Like I moved to the UK a few years ago for that job I mentioned earlier, and I was looking into like savings accounts, and I had spent probably 2 hours reading the various conditions and terms and so on, and then I realized, like, if I set aside the maximum amount of money that I'm allowed to by law at the best possible interest rate, locking away the maximum amount for the longest time at the highest rate, giving up the most control that I not even be like break even with regards to my time spent researching that. It was like over 3 years, I would have made something like £100 or something, which like I valued my time more than that. So I already felt like, I lost before I even started. So what's the point? And to me, like, Bitcoin is primarily about that. It's about having a way of expressing preferences about how the world should function that cannot be silenced after the fact, just because some politician decides like they know better. And in this regard, like, I don't see the lack of privacy as really a fundamental flaw. It's definitely a source of friction, but like the network effect is much more important to me, and the transparency properties, the trade-offs between technical complexity and verifiability. I think the more conservative trade-off is exactly what Adam Gibson was saying about how it's better to have like a more modest system in terms of its capabilities, to avoid the possibility of a catastrophic failure, and similarly, like the concerns about scaling, or the concerns about can we do like fancy DeFi stuff on it? To me, that's not very interesting. I'm much more interested in Bitcoin's ability to kind of rein in the recklessness of the fiat system, and if we can do that, and if we can force right, if it becomes a better proposition to exit the system, and whenever you see that there's local mismanagement, and you manage to like extract currency out of your local economic network and set it aside to, put it into Bitcoin, thereby helping to downregulate the craziness. If that has a positive effect on how fiat is managed, because now debt-based currencies need to compete with it, and we fix our systemic problems. Well, I mean, we already have a system that, from a technical standpoint, is, it's fine. Like we can pay for day-to-day things. It's the social aspects are like the reason, in my opinion, to care about this thing. And yeah, from this perspective, it's it's kind of like Zcash and Monero are make different trade-offs. They make even more difficult scalability trade-offs, and it doesn't seem like the risks outweigh the benefits, even had they happened before Bitcoin happened. But given that they came later, it's almost irrelevant to me. Like, again, the privacy, the technical ways in which it's achieved is fascinating to me. I think it's really cool tech, but monetarily, I just don't see that they are important enough. I'm very happy that they're around complementing Bitcoin. I think that they do have a role to play in improving its privacy as well. And but personally, I don't think that, like, if I'm trying to exercise that choice of feeling that I'm opting out of this corrupt system and spending my energy like planning for the future, buying Bitcoin seems like the closest thing to something I have hopes about. Whereas like buying Monero and Zcash, that just seems like a much riskier proposition if that's really what I'm interested in, if that makes sense.
You said that, pretty much what you said is that you love the properties, of Bitcoin being hard money. So being a privacy advocate yourself, and you did mention that Zcash and Monero do complement Bitcoin in a certain way, but, Bitcoin is much, what Bitcoin is doing is of much more, significance. So is it fair to say that you consider hard money of more priority than having total privacy on Bitcoin if it comes down to choice? Because there has been certain discussions that talks and theories of people saying that the next major conflict in the Bitcoin ecosystem would be between choosing between hard money and total privacy. With there are people who are very privacy centric and oriented in what they do, and there are people who feel like hard money is all that there is to be Bitcoin. Because if you're going to have Bitcoin adopted by governments and banks and all of that, they are not going to like Bitcoin having privacy on chain on the base layer. So for you, and just to get your thoughts, just to clarify, for you, do you feel that having hard money and Bitcoin having hard money properties outweighs everything else?
I guess, but then, so what exactly do we mean by hard money? I think for most people that means like a fixed supply and so on. For me, it's much more important that the rules are just set a priori. Like, this is why I consider Ethereum so problematic. It's not the inflation. It's not the, like, okay, there's a long list of issues I have with it, but the fact that these things change so readily, is what I find so troubling. So from a monetary perspective, I'm not really concerned about, Zcash and Monero being around, and if I remember correctly, Monero has like an uncapped supply but fixed reward. I would have actually preferred for Bitcoin to work that way. Again, asymptotically, that's 0% inflation, so I think that even like still satisfies most people's definition of what a hard money is. So yeah, that's the first nuance, which is like whether or not things are managed in a discretionary way or not. And as for the trade-off between privacy and this property, I think the risk for Monero and Zcash is much more about like the technical complexity. It's that there is the possibility of catastrophic failure of the system because of some cryptographic flaw, especially one that could go undetected for a while, seems to be to outweigh the downsides of this is a complex question. So from a purely risk-oriented perspective, the individual risk from using Bitcoin, I think, is much higher because of the lack of privacy. So as a user of a currency, I would be much more comfortable using Monero or Zcash because of this. Like knowing that my transactions are not going to be surveilled, they're like this information could not easily be used to target me after the fact or people I care about. It could not be used to like criminalize me if I'm under some oppressive regime. I think that's very valuable, but is it valuable enough to accept the collective systemic risk? There I'm not so certain, because I think that privacy in Bitcoin is something that we can still exercise a lot of choice about. It's despite the fact that there are flaws and disincentives in the system, right? It's much cheaper to destroy your privacy. I don't think we need that much overall to establish. So from a collective perspective, like if fungibility emerges from privacy, I don't think we really need to do all that much to establish a status quo where surveying Bitcoin and Bitcoin transactions is just not a viable thing for governments or surveillance capitalist companies to do productively. It's not a good use of resources in society. And I think that would be mostly good enough from the monetary aspect. Like that should suffice for keeping the censorship resistance properties intact, in my opinion. From an individual perspective, that's a very different trade-off. And there, I think, like people definitely need to use tools to protect themselves. Like if you, like I think Ledger's web wallet, for example, has as one of its default, like the fee minimization strategy, very aggressively consolidates all UTXOs in the wallet, which essentially means like whenever you transact, you're revealing the entire balance of your wallet to every one of your counterparties, and you're also creating like a linear chain of transactions then anybody can trivially peel back through the change identification heuristics and so on. So in a way, you're very like there isn't even plausible deniability with that kind of strategy for managing UTXOs. but you don't really have to go very far. Like, I think even though we've discovered that Lightning, for example, has some serious privacy limitations, it's still so much better than transacting this way, that for most individuals, it's probably a decent level of privacy to account for risks like, you know, getting mugged after you buy something online because somebody hacked into the website and realized that this person whose shipping address was in the database also happens to hold like a large amount of Bitcoins or something. Yeah, the individual versus the collective trade-offs are quite different. And looking at it from the broader perspective, I think clearly Bitcoin is a more conservative choice. But yeah, I'm kind of assuming that people do more to protect themselves, and I'm very hopeful that that's possible. Like I think Wasabi, for example, already does a fairly decent job of taking care of some of those problems, especially because it as a light client, it takes a lot of care to handle the network layer probably quite well. For example, the way it broadcasts transactions is probably as good as can be. The way it uses block filters is also really nice. And I mean, we're trying to improve the coinjoin stuff to make it more like use block space more efficiently and provide stronger assurances and remove some of the malincentives that are in the current system, so that hopefully, like, if users who are more concerned for their personal privacy and safety, if they have an option, and on the whole the ecosystem kind of accepts the fact that privacy, and this is an entirely political thing, right? Privacy is something that it's kind of a use it or lose it sort of proposition, where if enough people assert that they can do this without like and potentially even, you know, take one for the team, right? Go through bureaucratic nightmares with KYC regulations and so on. By the way, like for me, when I was just getting interested, living in the UK as an Austrian citizen with an Israeli driver's license, Coinbase just canceled my account after like one tiny purchase. So for several years, I had a disposable income and didn't know how I could buy. So like I wanted to exercise choice, but I couldn't. Unfortunately, I wasn't aware of BISC at the time, and so probably I could have figured it out. But you know, here a choice was taken away from me because of some company basically covering their ass, and it's like there was nothing wrong with what I was trying to do. They just decided that this is too much of an outlier. It's not worth the money. Like I think all I bought was like £50 or something worth, and you know, it wasn't even worth their time to answer my support request and explain why they closed my account. Only in hindsight did it become obvious to me that this is just, you know, part of their business model is to make sure that you know, slightly unusual people are just not in their risk models with regards to compliance. So the more we exercise choice to kind of assert that privacy is a thing that should be normalized. It's something that we all deserve, and the cost of it in terms of fees or you know, more externalized risks is sufficiently low that anybody can reasonably expect that. Then I think the system will be fine. Like we'll win this battle between privacy and hardness. It's a political struggle more than it is a technical one. And yeah, in this regard, this is also why I decided to like focus specifically on coinjoins, because in some sense, the reclaiming of privacy is overt. I think it's definitely not the whole story for fungibility or privacy in Bitcoin, but it sends, like when you use CoinJoin to get privacy, that also sends a message. And there's a risk in that. Hopefully, people are aware of, where CoinJoins are easily detectable as such, but they're not easily decipherable. So even though it's an overt technique, it still provides privacy, and doing it that way is basically making a statement about about whether or not there's a viable future for this.
Yeah, hell, I mean, it's been awesome. I appreciate your answers, because I say you've gone over a lot of different topics and kind of preemptively answered questions that I wanted to ask, and I think the other guys too, which is great. So it kind of like allowed you to kind of just go with it and give people a pretty good understanding of your why. And I think it's also a pretty good example as to my fascination with Bitcoin, to be honest, and probably quite a lot of people's. You kind of went into it in quite a lot of decent detail as to why you can't, especially that you said about like the different options people have out there kind of just feeling like scams. Like it feels like everything's kind of built to just kind of screw you in some one way or another, and kind of just especially with the bankers not getting prosecuted and the financial crash in 2008, which is probably going to happen again, I would expect. So yeah, I appreciate your time. It's been awesome to chat to you, and yeah, I also appreciate Ricardo, Jerry for joining us as well, and thank you to the listeners for listening. It's always much appreciated. But yeah, for now, we'll leave it at that, and I hope everyone has an awesome morning, afternoon, evening, day, week, year, whatever it is. But keep enjoying life, and we'll see you all soon.